Krystal and I had to do quite a bit of investigation.
I wish you guys could have heard us trying to figure this out on
Figuring
the phone
this one out, reading into the indictment and more, and in terms of, well, there's a lot of claims that are being thrown around. So let's get to the very, very bottom of it. The Durham investigation continues, that being John Durham, who was appointed by Attorney General Bill Barr to look into the originations of the Russiagate investigations. It's been going on now for many years, you know, and in terms of indictments and others, it has disappointed some, but what has been revealed most recently is quite interesting, and I don't want to overstate the case whatsoever. So let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. Daily Mail, actually of all places, did the best write-up in terms of what I can tell from the actual details of this investigation. So Special Counsel John Durham has said that the Clinton campaign paid a lawyer who then paid a tech firm to hack, and hack is actually disputed here, into the White House and Trump Tower servers to find Russia links. So here is the actual indictment, or in terms of the complaint that was issued against Michael Sussman. So Michael Sussman is a lawyer. He was working for the Clinton campaign. Now, 2 months before the 2016 presidential election, Michael Sussman met with then James Baker, who was the general counsel of the FBI. Sussman delivered to Baker a presentation in which he outlined what he claimed was a definitive proof that the Trump campaign and the Trump organization had links to Alpha Bank, which was a Russian bank, and thus that Trump was a Russian stooge. During the course of that conversation, Michael Sussman said that he was not acting on behalf of anybody's interests. Now that is what he's actually been criminally, or has a complaint against him, given that he was lying to James Baker, the FBI, because we now know he was being paid by the Clinton campaign. Now, here's where it gets interesting. What also is said is that Sussman was working on behalf of a tech executive. Now, per this new filing in this report from John Durham, this tech executive had access to a DNS company, which itself had been acquired and yet somehow has some sort of contracts and connections with the DNS firm which handles both Trump Tower and the executive office of the president. And that this tech executive working with Michael Sussman was compiling non-public DNS information, that's internet traffic information, of both Trump Tower and the executive office of the president while Trump was in office, in order to try and compile and spin a narrative that there was a connection between the Trump campaign, eventually the president of the United States, and the Russian government. So this lawyer essentially is the cutout with the Clinton campaign. He lied to the FBI. He was working with a tech company which had a contract in order to look at the DNS information of both Trump Tower and the White House, and that this tech company then was, or somebody in this tech company was using their position to compile and get this non-public data to then give to Michael Sussman to try and craft a narrative which then made it seem that the Trump campaign was aligned with Russia. So there you go. I know it's complicated. It's not as easy as, well, the Clinton campaign was hacking. It's like, kind of, they were paying somebody to do this and had a connection with this guy who also had access to this information. Not necessarily a hack itself, definitely an abuse of power in terms of the tech executive. We don't know who this tech executive is necessarily. They name one person in the indictment, but we don't know if it was him or somebody who was working for him. So that's the long and short of the story. I know it sounds incredibly complicated. All of these Russiagate stories are like this. So that is, you know, that is as best as I can a summary.
You guys might remember, this was towards the end of the Clinton campaign. We started to see these stories pop up in the media about the Trump Tower pinging.
The server.
Yeah, the server.
Alpha Bank.
Pinging Alpha Bank. And the articles were always very tantalizing because
I remember reading.
Seemed, this could be like the nexus. Like if they're having some secret communications, this could be how it is all being done. And so what this story really exposes is sort of the genesis of where those particular stories were coming from. And so we had already learned that this lawyer allegedly lied to the authorities about the fact that he was, in fact, working for the Clinton campaign and being paid for the Clinton campaign by the Clinton campaign to kind of get the intelligence community to take this seriously, okay? And this was all happening before the campaign even ended. So there's that piece we kind of already knew. The new piece here goes into details about how exactly they were able to gather this information about these pings coming from Trump Tower and then ultimately coming from the executive office of the president. And the language is very opaque and not very specific. But what we can gather here is that allegedly this tech company had access to both the Trump Tower information and the executive office of the president information through other contracts, other things that they were doing.
Yes.
That this was non-public information. So this wasn't something that just like a smart person who's super tech savvy could go out there on the web and gather. They had access to this confidential information, and they mined this information and other data for the purpose of, this is directly from the complaint, for the purpose of gathering derogatory information about Donald Trump. Then the way it was presented to the intelligence community was in this very sort of skewed way that didn't include the context that actually these sorts of pings are pretty common, and that the ones that were coming from the EOP and coming from Trump Tower, that this represents a very, very, very small fraction of the ultimate traffic that was going in this direction. I'm sorry, guys, I'm way out of my depth here in terms of the tech. But the basic idea is that they were using non-public information to spin a story to the FBI, and they were lying about their motivations for spinning this story. That's really what this ultimately comes down to. I'll read you a little bit more of the language here because it gives you a sense of where some of this information came from. It says, in connection with these efforts, that Tech Executive One exploited his access to non-public and or proprietary internet data. Tech Executive One also enlisted the assistance of researchers at a US-based university who were receiving and analyzing large amounts of internet data in connection with a pending federal government cybersecurity research contract. So they're using this data that is not public to spin a narrative to try to persuade the FBI that there's something here that they need to leak into. And then we also know that they were obviously feeding the story to media outlets. And the journalists who, uncritically and unthinkingly were willing to regurgitate the story have all, of course, been elevated.
That's
highly successful.
Franklin Foer. I mean, this guy, he was at The Atlantic. He made a lot of money.
Natasha Bertrand was another one, right?
is another one, Alpha Bank. I mean, these were big careers made. She made her way all the way from Business Insider, National Security, to the top NBC News, MSNBC analyst, making a lot of money, getting big contracts, and today actually serves as a chief conduit of a lot of what the CIA wants to launder in terms of public information. Right now, during the Ukraine crisis, this is the biggest and greatest sin of Russiagate, is normalizing and making the careers of people who ultimately, at the end of the day, are mouthpieces for the CIA and others that have long-standing consequences far outside of Donald Trump.
Well, these are like some of the same people now who are being relied upon for their Ukraine analysis.
Exactly. And this matters, has a big implication.
Really matters.
In terms of our public policy. But let's also not forget Donald Trump's
I'm sure he's
role in all
handling
this.
this information in a very mature and responsible way, Saagar.
In the most Trumpian way possible. Let's go put a statement up there on the screen. So the latest pleading from special counsel provides indisputable evidence my campaign was spied on by operatives paid by the Hillary Clinton campaign. This is a scandal far greater in scope and magnitude than Watergate. Those who were involved in and knew about this spying operation should be subject to criminal prosecution. In a stronger period of time in our country, this crime could have been punishable by death.
Oh my
in
God.
addition, reparations should be paid to those in our country who have been damaged by this. I don't know what those reparations would look like. It says we should use the death penalty against those who were involved, the most Trumpian response possible. Look, all things considered, I don't care this story one way or the other. I mean, look, I thought Russiagate was a traumatic and a horrific thing that happened to the country, that it was a great crime by many elites and in the media to grapple with their own failings of Hillary Clinton. That being said, it's been 6-something years now. And whenever you look at this, Michael says, okay, fine, prosecute Michael Sussman. Obviously, Hillary was dirty. But look, Trump, I mean, you won the 2016 election against all odds. That's the real story to me. And then, yes, I mean, You barely lost. You only lost by 40,000 votes in the 2020 presidential election. So litigating what happened in September of 2016, I don't think that's the biggest story in the country. I thought Obamagate, Ukrainegate, and Russiagate were immensely important at the time, and they certainly should have been investigated. And I support, bringing those people to justice, and I think they were dirty as hell. But to still focus and litigate on the 2016 election at this point is just pointless. We have much, much bigger problems than that. And everybody getting all wrapped up on this and right-wing media, I don't know what to tell you. You were correct. I'm not disputing it.
Yeah.
The media are definitely, enemies, criminals for what they did back in 2017 and all throughout the Russiagate scandal. But look, man, we got COVID, we got an economy, supply chain crisis. I think it's time to move on.
Yeah, I think the other piece of this that is important, though, is that the media was so obsessed with this story.
Oh, God, yeah.
And part of why we had so much trouble figuring out what the hell happened is because you only have like 2 outlets
Right.
that even cover it.
Yes.
Right. The initial story came from Fox News, and Fox News, y'all got to get it together because that thing was incomprehensible.
Yeah, it was written horribly.
It was so poorly written. We were like,
that's why we put the Daily Mail thing up there, because at least they did a decent job.
Right. Explained it in a way that was like 70% comprehensible.
Right.
But that's part of the problem is that since you only have like 1 or 2 write-ups to rely on, and they both come from partisan media, it makes it really hard to try to really figure out, okay, obviously Trump is saying like spying, treason, hang them. And, there's this very dense article to try to figure out what's going on here. So it makes it very difficult to accurately report what happened and, why it matters and what the stakes ultimately are. And I think, just to tie it back to some of the conversations we've been having about censorship and misinformation and all of that is the people who spread this kind of misinformation, which is so damaging, which we will live with the consequences of for a long time. You've infected like half the population with these horrific Russia brainworms, going right back to this total Cold War mentality. There's no accountability there. They don't even feel it. And this is, I think, was it Taibbi that also made this point about this is in some ways worse than in the Iraq War? Because at least at the end of that, they all had to acknowledge, like, we got played and we were really wrong.
Yes.
And there was some sort of like contrition about it. Now with this, like, they won't even cover the new developments that expose how wrong they were from the beginning and the way that they were manipulated and played, or in some, cases, like knew basically that they were lying to the public. So that's, I think, probably the most important piece of this story ultimately is it is a media story about how they were really happy to go into all of these insane conspiracies. What if Trump was a Russian agent since 1987 and the P-tape and all of that? But the stuff that comes out now that's inconvenient for what they were selling for years, they just don't even bother. They don't even bother to talk about it. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.